Hello Space Watchers, and welcome back to another live episode of Space Café 33 Minutes with. Today we are live from ILA Berlin, and we're here at the DLR booth. With me we have the pleasure and honor to have Holger Krag, Space Safety Program Manager at ESA. Holger, how are you doing?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you and welcome. So yesterday we assisted to a very important ceremony, the signatures from 42 new members of the Zero Debris Charter, which is a very important ESA initiative, strongly pushed by Dr. Ashbacher, the Director General of ESA. Holger, in your opinion, why do we need a charter? Don't we have enough regulations in Europe?
No, that's a very valid question. If you look at the situation in space today, we do have roughly 1 million of objects larger than a cherry. Each of them is traveling with orbital velocities. It means when they get hitting one of our spacecraft, they will do that with a velocity of 40,000 kilometers in an hour, and that will destroy our space systems. Now, these objects are a result of the space traffic of the past. And in the space traffic of the past, we actually already had guidelines and even rules and even laws that we're aiming to prevent space debris. So why are we in the situation that we are in today? Even on top of that, having to face an increased amount of space traffic still to come, because if you look at spaceflight today, we're actually starting now to use space properly.
Absolutely.
And that's, of course, something we want to preserve in the future. So why did we end up in this situation despite of having space debris prevention measures? And the reason is they are difficult to achieve. We are failing to meet them because space systems that will have to meet them need to be designed to be robust for several years in space to reliably execute, for example, a maneuver to get out of space at the end of the mission, or to passivate all energy sources on board to prevent explosions. And that might surprise you, but several hundreds of them has happened. And these are the results we are feeling today, are all the objects around us. So this is difficult to achieve, and we need technology, and we need to raise the bar for these. But not this, raising the bar in regulation is not enough. We need the technology to come with it. And therefore, the Charter makes a very bold move, because it asks, for example, to make sure that an object is removed from space after the mission by all means, including means coming from external to capture and get one of your objects down. And that is quite novel. You will not see this in other documents, and you will also find that this charter is unique in the way how accurately it addresses actually mitigation and prevention requirements by the numbers. Very technical.
Yes, definitely a critical situation. This is a man-created problem that is tough to resolve, as you say. So, going back to yesterday, to the Zero Debris Charter, you had 42 new signatures. This is an impressive result. Congratulations. But what does it mean? What does it symbolize? Something interesting is that among these 42 new signatures, there were several industry, private sector signatures that decide to abide, to subscribe to the Charter. What does it symbolize?
This shows that there's a large community of both agencies, but also industry who have to implement it, that are ready for more strict requirements and more aggressive action to be taken. And that's not given at all. I think it's not enough to address regulators. You need to take along a community of those that are actually implementing. And that is what the Charter achieves. It achieves to bring these two groups together and actually document the willingness to move one step ahead.
So the Charter is a non-binding agreement. So what is actually ESA doing to actually commit to it?
You're right. The Charter cannot replace space law, so it is a non-binding agreement. But we hope and we expect that all the members and signatories to the Charter, as far as capable, are doing all efforts to make them applicable to themselves. So in the case of ESA, for example, we are a space agency, but we are also a regulator, because we are responsible for the processes to be implemented for our own ESA space missions. And there we have already self-committed to a set of requirements, which are law to us, that even go beyond what the Charter entails. One prominent example is, for example, that by 2030, all ESA missions must be equipped with an interface that can be used to actually capture the object with an external vehicle and get it down. And we would expect and ask all missions to be launched after 2030 to guarantee, by demonstrating, for example, a contract or an insurance contract with the removal service provider, that the object is taken down when the disposal has failed. And that is law for ESA. And that's how we expect also, and hope that also the other players signing the Charter would actually find their way to implement this on their ground.
Maybe, we spoke about the Charter several times, but we never dig into the actual rules of the Charter. Can you explain us which are the rules that these companies should follow and that ESA has drafted?
If you open charters and guidelines, you'd usually find many pages with a lot of words.
Of course.
Our charter has just 2 pages and 3 guiding principles and just 5 technical requirements, if you will. One is to make sure that debris generating in events are to be limited to very low probability, 1 in 1,000, over the whole time spent in orbit. That objects must be removed with 99% reliability. And that includes external removal by active service vehicles. Then on-ground risk is to be limited, data is to be shared, and access to data for small space objects, accurate information on the position and orbits of the small space objects needs to be generated. These are the 5 principles, very numerical.
Well, I will argue one of the most important one is the very simple rule of if you put a satellite up, then you have to take it down, because that's one of the problems of debris, is that we are contaminating the space with abandoned satellites, that become a problem because, as you say, they can get hit, they can become smaller debris, and then it's a kind of chain of event.
This is definitely the highlight, you're right. The problem of the past has been to put a rule, for example, a probability of 90% to make the disposal happen. But we find that in reality we are more at 70 or 80% if you look at what happens up there in the past. The new rule makes sure it's going to happen. Either way, either you manage to do it by your own means on board, and when they fail, you still have the means to get there with an extra vehicle to get it down. This is, of course, very bold and ambitious, but it's a step that we have to do. And of course, we cannot ask that in isolation without the technology to do that being available, and that's something we need to work on.
Well, if you abandon a car nowadays on the side of the road, you get fined at some point if they discover that it's you. I know space is not as easy as human roads, but somehow sometimes it's easier for my mind to find very local examples to understand how we could deal with the debris issue. You mentioned, sorry, please, do you want?
You have a similar rule in all national parks,
exactly.
Right? What you bring in, you take out. Why don't we do this for space?
Exactly. So you mentioned before the international space law. Would you think that the Charter is somehow complementary to the international space law? How those 2 entities can interact?
So the Charter does not violate space law. It's fully in line with the space law, and it also clearly states, above all, is the international space law. The Charter just documents the ambition that all the signatories would like to take to be better than what is being asked. That's how the Charter is to be seen. It can be a template for future, for example, national law. We have an international space law, and that international space law actually says that each launching state should regulate the spaceflight out of its nation. And how that regulation of spaceflight out of the nation is to be done, that's up to the state. And here the Charter gives some very important guidance, because it gives a template on how this could be done in a very ambitious way, and more beautifully even in a harmonized way, because if these principles are applied everywhere, well, you will have a harmonized rule set, and that, I think, is exactly what we need.
So it can also be a sort of like template for consequent, if it works, why not? It can be a sort of a path to understand how we can deal with this problem. Holger, let's step out of the regulatory framework and get into the technical parts. I know that you are an operative person, so it's always important for us and interesting to understand which are the real challenges that debris poses. What does it mean in practice to have to navigate through this sea of debris? Can you explain us the challenges of actually navigating?
Yes, I'm working in an operational space center, the European Space Operations Center in Darmstadt, where the ESA fleet of spacecraft is operated from. 20 spacecraft currently, and I have first-hand experience on what it means to fly in this environment. It's a lot of work, stressful. Collision warnings are coming all the time. Roughly every 2 weeks, one of our spacecraft has to maneuver, and that's always an effort. You have to have an on-call team ready. You need to spend some fuel. Sometimes you need extra station passes. You might lose some data during the time when you maneuver. It's a burden, and the trend is going upwards. So it's becoming ever more stressful and ultimately more expensive. And I think that's the key to your question. What does it mean? Spaceflight gets more expensive through this problem every day, and one day we might face a wall where spaceflight might not pay off anymore, and that's definitely to be avoided.
It's definitely not what we want, but as you said, and I completely agree with you, is a road upwards, because we want to increase our traffic, we want to increase our presence in orbit, so we absolutely need to somehow limit as fast as possible the debris problem. Otherwise, we're gonna. So this is maybe not the right example, but we also want to establish a route to the moon, and we want to use the Earth to Moon highway as much as possible. We want it become a sort of daily trip. So something that now, as you say, every 2 weeks you need to maneuver. Maybe you will need to do it every week, every day, and that is going to be cost impactful somehow.
That's exactly the point. Yeah. If we spend our spacecraft maneuvering all the time, they cannot do the mission anymore, and then. We are losing the purpose of spaceflight, and we should not forget how well we are connected to space already today. So when you look at your smartphone, half of the apps on there already rely on a service coming from space. That can be navigation, that can be phone calls themselves, that's the weather forecast, and that's the broadband internet in the future. So we are at the risk of losing all these services if we are not watching out.
So let's stick to the technology challenge, but let's apply them to the charter. You already mentioned it before in one of your previous answers, the need of new technology to be able to make the charter a reality. In your opinion, which type of technology we already have to tackle the challenge of debris, and which technology is still missing? Where is the bottleneck?
Yep. That's the key of the problem. The technology needs to mature, and first of all, our spacecraft platforms need to be prepared for more enhanced requirements. Today, success rate in actually disposing a space system is far below 90%. So we need to mature this platform, make them more redundant, perhaps also have extra devices on board, like the orbiting kits, which could be mounted before you launch, that have, for example, autonomous propulsion and autonomous communication to make sure that disposal will work at likelihoods far above 90%. Then we need the technology to make sure passivation works. Energy gets off from board, propulsion, pressure tanks, charged batteries, all this needs to get out. Spacecrafts are not designed for this, to do this today, so this needs to be built in. And then, of course, most important of all, we need the technology to go up in space with a dedicated service vehicle, rendezvous and capture an object, and get it down safely. That's what we call active removal. This has not been done. And we are working on it. It needs to be demonstrated in the next few years, because when the technology is not available, no regulator will move and make these more ambitious laws applicable. The two must come together. Technology must be there to assure regulators we can do it, and then regulators must pick it up, because then the technology will be used.
So a lot of private companies, when we ask about active removal, they point at the fact that it's still too expensive, especially if you are a small company. What do you think about this? Do you agree with that? Oh, you didn't hear me, of course, because we have an announcement, sorry. So some private companies point at the fact that active removal is too expensive. What do you think? Do you think it's true? Do you think it's a problem? How can you resolve it?
A single active removal mission is, of course, not cheap. This is clear. Definitely the first one we are doing to demonstrate the whole thing would include all the development cost of the new concept and the mission and the demonstration. But likewise, when you produce car, the prototype is very expensive, but when you go in a more repetitive production of the same thing, it becomes cheaper and cheaper. And then there's another thing we should not forget. We would only ask removal action when the disposal has failed. And the likelihood for this to happen should be 10%. So in other words, if you have an insurance contract making sure removal service is coming in when you fail to dispose, it should have a fee of just 10% of the removal costs, theoretically. And then it becomes maybe just 2, 3, or 4% of the mission cost. And that's absolutely tolerable for the sake of the environment, in my view.
In the end, not only our world, but the universe will be run by insurances. This is my final conclusion. They will rule again. Okay, Holger, what's the next step for the charter now? What we should expect? You achieved a lot yesterday. It's an impressive objective to achieve 42 new signatures. What's next?
Yesterday we got 42 signatures from industrial partners, also from international organizations, but we already have 12 signatures from space agencies. And that's quite meaningful as well, because it means that space agencies often represent states, so that there's also a governmental readiness to go in a more ambitious ruling. And that's a very, very important signal. At the same time, the signature of industry documents that industry is ready to implement this when this becomes a law. And we want to expand signatories in both directions, because both is important. But then the work on the charter is not done. The charter is a living document. It even says in its preamble that each signatory will regularly revisit and report on the project, on the progress he made in achieving these goals, and also contribute to the further evolution of the charter, and also acquire additional signatories. So we are constantly working on it. It's a working document. You will see it again and again in the next years.
So looking at the future, Holger, in your opinion, where the charter and in general all the debris issue at the moment is focused on LEO, because of course it's a contingent problem, do you think that we should also start to consider the MEO and GEO orbits, like try to avoid to repeat what we are doing in LEO also on the external orbits? What's your view? What's your position?
Of course, we should make sure that solving the problem for one region in space does not lead to problems in the other regions. But the way the charter is designed is that it is robust to this. At the moment, we are almost overusing the low Earth orbit environment, and that has particular attention, but also other strategic regions in space, like the geostationary orbit, and then also soon the orbits in between. They will receive the required attention as well. So we don't need to worry that any important and strategic orbit region will be forgotten.
So overusing is the key word, I believe. Okay, final question. This is a question I always ask when I have the chance to speak with a debris expert like you. What is, in your opinion, the single most relevant cause of this pickle that we are in, of the debris problem?
The root cause of the problem today is our failure to reliably implement debris prevention. So the objects that we are having in space today are a result of failed mitigation of the past. That's the truth. And they will interact with each other. Collisions will be more frequently happening, and fragments resulting from these collisions will then trigger again secondary collisions, and that's what we call collisional cascading. So collisions with fragments from other collisions, and therefore ramping up the number of objects in space, even if we don't launch anymore. Just the dynamics among the objects that are already up there could cause this effect. It's the so-called Kessler syndrome, which is already working in space, unfortunately, but currently it's happening at a very low level. the worse we behave in the future, the more we will fuel it. Similar like with the climate, right? It's going to be warmer in the future, but if you do not behave, it will be even warmer. So what we need to do is to keep the curve flat, and that's what the Zero Debris Charter tries to contribute to.
And yes, of course, it's never a problem until it's a problem, and humanity tends to face problems only when they become a challenge for technology. And then usually we try to fix the problem, creating another problem. So I always have the perception that humanity keeps repeating the same mistakes over and over again, especially when it comes to technology. We love technology, it pushes our boundary further, it pushes our culture. Sometimes, in my opinion, we are a bit reckless in the way how we use technologies. We just not take into account the potential risks, of course, because it's difficult to predict something that is not known. And the unknown unknowns are really dangerous, especially in space. So I always feel that history repeats itself somehow. Okay, Holger, anything you would like to add? Something I didn't ask you?
People often ask, there are so many small objects which impact our spacecraft daily and that can kill our spacecraft, but the Charter only addresses the handling of the large objects. Why is that? And the reason is that smaller objects will be removed from space by natural means, in the atmosphere, and its drag cleaning out the environment, and smaller objects are more sensitive to this. But what is happening today is we are reproducing smaller objects daily by large objects breaking up, exploding, but colliding with each other, and that's the source of the problem. We need to tackle the source. This is leaving large objects in space behind, and zero debris is going to stop that.
Fantastic. This is the end of our Space Café 33 minutes with Holger Krag. Thank you very much, Holger, for being my guest today. It was a pleasure. And from Berlin, this is all. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. SpaceWatch out.